It's time once again for Dialogue Conspiracy with Mae Brussell. For the past 14 years, Mae has been researching and uncovering facts and evidence from between the lines of the news and placing them in a more thorough perspective of how conspiracy, political assassination, and abuses of power affect us all. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB-FM in Carmel, California. And now, Mae Brussell.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. It's April 16th, 1978 in Carmel, California, and this is Dialogue Conspiracy number 317. This evening's program is competing really for a half hour of time from the Holocaust. I hope that the people in the local area are listening to it tonight. I hope they turn to Dialogue Conspiracy from 10 to 10:30 and then get back to the Holocaust. Sorry they're on at the same time. I want to go at length into that television series, and I will be doing it for maybe the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks because the Nazification of America, or the Fourth Reich, which is the subject of an entire book, is coming to a head. I believe that there's an undercurrent of people whose awareness is being made more clear about some of the things our government is doing to us now and the potential for the Nazification. It's been my allegation for many, many years, when I started working on the John Kennedy assassination as early as 14 years ago, that we had specific Nazis from Germany that were taken to South America, Brazil, Argentina, Washington, the Southwest, into the space program, and California, all over the United States, in Asia, Africa, South Africa, and South America, and the purpose was to reconstruct and refinance the Fourth Reich. And I became very conscious of that when I began to cross-file the Warren Commission hearings and saw that Lee Harvey Oswald's closest friends were German Nazi spies or Nazis or worked with Nazis and were Nazi war criminals, had contacts with them, and that Lee Harvey Oswald's connections were with the extreme right-wing czarists, the people that put Adolf Hitler into power and that are still functioning. They are not dead. Some are in their 80s now, but they still can function very well. In the book of lists, there's that came out that Irving Wallace and his son, daughter-in-law put out. There's a list of, I think, 20 well-known people who accomplished something from the age 80 to 100. And you can see that many people like Winston Churchill and Bertrand Russell and George Bernard Shaw and Pablo Picasso and the whole list of 120 people specifically who achieved a lot. And these Nazis can do the same thing if they're trained from youth and they are writing books. If Himmler is actually in the United States as a writer, and he was the man behind the whole Holocaust, the idea of using the doctors for the genocide policies, the medical men from the universities of Europe to exterminate millions and millions of people, then we have to wonder where they're located in the world, in the United States, what influence they have in the White House, in the National Security Agency, in the Pentagon. And I've tried to cross-file as many of those as I could that go directly to the assassinations, so that the Holocaust isn't a dead issue, it's a current one, and in understand the present, you have to understand the past. So I hope that those who get the tape later did see the 4-part show, the 3-part series, and those that are listening tonight will turn it on at least the last half hour if they didn't see and watch for the rest of the week. And don't tell me it's too depressing and you want to have some fun, because the time is getting late, and I think you should get on with it and study the past. And it wasn't past, and because these people are around, it is definitely the present. There was an article in the Washington Post this last week, well, it was April the 6th, 2 weeks ago, by George Lardner on 3 officials of the CIA before Senate hearings. The last 3 years since Watergate, the Senate is trying to reconstruct the Central Intelligence Agency and put a handle on some of their domestic activities. And if you know that the charter of the CIA was not to include activities in the United States, then you know that this has been totally disregarded and that these people are functioning in the United States very well, illegally, and for no reason except that they did take over the government at the time that John Kennedy was assassinated. The Senate for 3 years has been working with the guidance of William Colby, who was the director of the CIA from 1975 to 1976. he's been guiding them through these various investigations. And Mr. Colby was at the hearings, and also Mr. Bush was there, and another high official of the CIA, Mr. Noche, Knoche. And the Senate is trying to put some prohibitions on the Central Intelligence Agency, and I think you might want to know what they are. For the first suggestion, they wanted to give a penalty for torture, probably life imprisonment, for several subjects. One would be to assassinate foreign officials. This is according to the article. The other would be to stop such activities as, in quotes, torture. Another prohibition they'd put on the Central Intelligence Agency now is to stop them from creating epidemics or diseases. And another one would be to stop the Central Intelligence Agency from creating food and water shortages or floods. And I believe that I am the only person in the United States who has written articles, published articles, and been on the air week after week. I've been on 7 years, but I have continuously said and written that the Central Intelligence Agency is using satellites built by the Hughes Organization and Summa Corporation to see where food grows, and using satellites to see where water is, and causing floods and causing food shortages with an intent, specifically a figure given to me by a man who I've mentioned who went to England several years ago, the intent to kill 63 million Americans. I've done some radio shows several years back on the cemeteries that are being provided for 100 million Americans, which is half the American population already. They've been set aside. Now, this is interesting that Mr. Colby is helping them with these restrictions, or Mr. Bush of the CIA. They said that they would prohibit torture and they would stop assassinating foreign officials. This is a suggestion of new curbs, or stop food or water shortages or floods. But what isn't included, at least in the George Lardner article, Washington Post, this is April the 6th, 1978, if you want to go to your library and copy it, they don't classify electroshock as torture. When a witness like George DeMohrenschildt, who worked with the Nazis and with the Central Intelligence Agency, and Lee Harvey Oswald, is taken to Parkland Hospital and given massive electroshock over and over again until he's terrorized, and he was Lee Harvey Oswald's CIA and Defense Agency control, and then he is told telephonically or hypnotically or whatever to shoot himself in the mouth if somebody actually didn't shoot him in the mouth. When a man like that gets this kind of treatment with no history of mental illness up to the time that the House Select Committee is going to investigate assassinations, the CIA isn't going to define that as torture. They're going to define that as medical treatment, that his wife put him in the hospital for medical treatment. They're talking about epidemic and diseases. In my SLA article, the SLA is the CIA, which I still think is an important article for everyone to read. If they don't have it, they can order them from me. What I said in the introduction was that the CIA would end up with acts of violence which would include chemical warfare, that they were making plans for chemical warfare against the cities in the United States. And in this particular article in the CIA, it says that they're trying to stop epidemic of diseases. And I've accused the swine flu vaccines, the Legionnaire's disease, as being the beginning of over-testing, paralyzing people, making them crippled when they were supposed to be inoculating them, and getting them used to line up for injections. They have the viruses to knock out entire cities, and there is nothing in this that I read that prohibits railroad accidents, sabotaging railroad trains, or fires, which I have accused the Central Intelligence Agency of starting, and someday you will see that they do kindle forest fires, and they've done that, and they assassinate domestic leaders. The prohibitions, as I say in this article, say that they wouldn't be able to assassinate foreign officials, they wouldn't be able to torture, they can't create epidemics of diseases, they can't create food or water shortages or floods. Now, in order for Congress to work 3 years to even consider making laws such as life imprisonment for officials who create food or water shortages or floods, means that they already must have done it and certainly have the capability, because they wouldn't be making the law to curb them if they didn't have that capability. As I say, there's nothing about train derailments, mind control, or domestic assassinations, so that Mr. Colby can go along with these, because the important prohibitions, disease control, causing disease, in this country, and mind control and political assassinations of public officials or labor leaders or witnesses to trial are the important things, and they're not included in the reorganization of the CIA. But it's bad enough to talk about the punishment for creating food or water shortages or floods, which is, in fact, what I've been saying they're doing, and now they're trying to pass laws to stop them from doing. And yet there's nothing there. And I must emphasize, in the next few weeks I will be talking about Dachau, Auschwitz, the Holocaust, and the way it was put together and the similarities to what's happening in this country. So watch the movies, or if you did, we'll be talking about it soon. Last week on Dialogue Conspiracy, I said that I would talk about Operation Mind Control, about the article in New West. It's April 10th, 1978. It's about Paul Krassner and a lawsuit in San Francisco. It involves San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli, who is Jack Ruby's attorney. He'll be in court this summer. This is what the article in the New West says, and then we'll talk about it. That they are seeking $450 million in a libel suit against Rolling Stone and against Paul Krassner. The case will be up there in June, and I'll let you know on the air if some of you want to go to the court, and I'll be testifying if you want to go observe this trial. It'll be interesting. In 1975, Rolling Stones published a story by Paul Krassner called "My Trip with Squeaky Fromm, Just One of Charlie's Girls." He was researching the Charles Manson family when he stumbled across the name of Charles Winans. This is what the Rolling Stone said, the New West article says. He stumbled across the name of Charlie Winans. Krassner wrote that Winans worked in quotes, naval intelligence, and that he was, in quotes, an agent provocateur who posed as a hippie artist and who, in quotes, orchestrated the scenario of violence and witchcraft that led to the killings in Los Angeles at Sharon Tate's home and the killing of Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca. The article says Krassner had 4 sources of information. 1, noted conspiracy theorist Mae Brussell. 2, Louise James, Winans' next-door neighbor. 3, California author Stan Ross, who told Krassner he saw Winans' name as an important informant on a police record, and Sue Atkins of the Manson family. New West says that Krassner now admits that Stan Ross may have misunderstood and gave the wrong information by mistake. Sue Atkins denies knowing Charles Winans. Louise James, according to New West, can't substantiate any information. And that, of course, then leaves Mae Brussell as really the primary witness in a $450 million lawsuit. The way I met Charles Winans was that in September 1969, I went to New Orleans to meet District Attorney Jim Garrison, who had arrested Clay Shaw for participating in the assassination to kill John Kennedy. Louise James, a close neighbor, the witness that the New West article rather says can't substantiate her information, was the next-door neighbor of Charles Winans and his family. She lived about 15 feet away from them in a small bungalow, and they had a larger home. The home belonged allegedly to a member family of military intelligence who were overseas, I believe in Korea, and they were renting the house to another military family, I believe. When I got home from New Orleans, this was the end of September 1967, a family was living in the house next to Louise, who was my close friend, and around November, the family all of a sudden moved out very fast. They didn't tell Louise James they were moving out. She knew them. She talked to them all the time. They had a friendly neighborhood relationship. And one day, the vans came and they just completely moved out, which floored her. And then an Army van moved in, a dark green type of khaki van with an identification of some Army base. And another family moved in, which isn't unusual for the Monterey Peninsula because we're close to Fort Ord and we have the Presidio Language School. We're near Hunter Liggett. And so a family moved in, but out of the house came these hippies. They were dressed as hippies and for all the world looked like the California variety of 1967 hippie. And at the time, one family moved out so fast and the other one moved in so quickly with the Army helping them that Louise and I were very concerned about this. And we watched them. We were observing them just because we were active politically, and I'll give you a rundown of what Louise was doing at the time. And the reason I'm building up the story of Louise James because New West says that as a witness to this trial, she is not a reliable witness anymore. She can't substantiate her information. But I believe that Louise James is a classic example of what is described in the book Operation Mind Control, that because of what she saw in regards to these various conspiracies and because of her very heavy political involvement, she was neutralized with substance put into her water or food and reduced to a literal zombie so that she can't remember anything or see anybody involved in the case anymore. When this family moved in, Louise and I were politically active and we were exposing the system. I was in New Orleans there with Jim, and I was working hard on the Kennedy assassination. And I was involved calling the police department and exposing the Robert Kennedy assassination in Los Angeles, which took place in 1968. That came 1 year later, but in 67, in the winter of 67, we were already watching the Winans family, and in June in 68 was the time of the Robert Kennedy assassination. But we were watching the system and how it operated and managed. We were watching the use of doubles in the house, of late-night meeting, of sources of income that were unexplained, the separation of a husband and wife with low-key visibility similar to Lee and Marina Oswald, mail drops, guests, and trips in the dark that didn't take place at night, and the kind of people going in and out of the house. Because, as I say, Louise was very political, and she wanted to see and observe the operations over at the Winans house. So in a sense, we were playing spy because we thought the Winans were too close to us. We thought that for things that they did immediately, their outward appearance versus how they came in, that they were agents or agent provocateurs. And we were watching them very closely. And we couldn't have been too careful. There was an article just this last week that came out of Zodiac News that the CIA had undercover informants with the local police in the 60s, or in the late 60s. This was in the period 67, 68. And then they worked with field offices and the campuses and state and local police and the FBI and the Air Force and the Army and Navy. And the operation was called Project Resistance. The whole United States was infiltrated with these agents, and it was the height of the anti-war movement. So we were watching these people. And then in 1969, the murders took place at Sharon Tate's home, August 9th, 1969. Steve Parent was murdered, Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, and Jay Sebring. The next night, Rosemary Bianca and Leo Bianca. It was around December when the men and women were apprehended for being suspects in the murder case, and the arrest took place. And when this happened, Louise James said her allegation was that she recognized these people that were over at Charles Winans' house, that she recognized some of the members of the Manson family. She saw when Charles Watson's name came out, she recognized Charles Watson, and she recognized some of the women. I don't remember which ones they were, whether it was Squeaky Fromm or Sue Atkins or Leslie Van Houten or Patricia Kerwinkle or Sandra Good. She recognized some of the women from the Manson family and Charles Watson, specifically over at Charles Winans' home at her next-door neighbors. That was in 1969, but we both had been having contact with the Winans, she living 15 feet away, and I socializing with them, making a point to know them and actually liking them. Their children and our children played together. And so Louise was close to the scene from 67 to 1969 when the photographs of the members of the Manson family came down. Now, Louise was not only a next-door neighbor, just happening to watch an interesting family operate. She was probably my best political teacher, just in the practical sense. I was naive and innocent in terms of politics. In those days, I still am in a way, but much more than when I met Louise. And she was the most dynamic political woman on the Monterey Peninsula as an activist. She was in the forefront of the anti-war movement, which was constantly bugged and taped our meetings, and I went to them with her. She opened the GI Coffee House in Seaside for war resistors and helped soldiers get politicized and informed about the war in Vietnam. When the Seaside community has her 4th of July parade, she challenged the military area, and she was told as a member of the Peace and Freedom Party and so forth, they couldn't have floats or they couldn't march in the parade. They had to stay on the sidewalk. So when the parade was over and the last float came, she and Roger Lorenz were crossing the street, and they were arrested for just putting their foot on the street and picked up by the military police. She published an alternative newspaper here on the peninsula called The Nose. And in The Nose, I wrote many articles for her, and we had pictures of Louis Tackwood agent provocateur from Los Angeles that she recognized here on the Monterey community. She helped Jesse Phillips, a black man. This here was a white woman in Carmel Valley helping a black man get out of prison, out of Soledad prison, and talking about the CIA and the FBI in a California prison system and their drugging of them long before anybody else was aware of it. She informed groups of the prison savagery about the segregation. And then when the murders of 3 black men took place in Soledad Prison, January 14, 1970, William Nolan, Cleveland Edwards, and Alvin Miller, by these guards, a purposeful murdering of 3 black men, just shooting them right out in the yard. She was right in the forefront of exposing. I was at her home when the information came about their murder, and she wrote articles, and she spoke and organized the Peace and Freedom Party. She worked with the Black Panthers. She helped form a women's movement. She was one of the first activist women that I ever met, and was active in the Peace and Freedom Party when they had an office down in Alvarado, and the office was bombed and tires were slashed. She helped Brady Avery, a black man who had a car repair shop in Seaside, an all-white community here out by Fort Ord, and a civil rights suit got going because he couldn't let cars park in front of his shop to be repaired. Brady won a $40,000 lawsuit and went to the California Supreme Court against Sand City, and the jury allocated him $40,000 and his partner. And then before they paid the $40,000, the judge rescinded the agreement of the jury, called Brady in and said take a amount, I believe it was $5,000 or $7,000 or nothing. And within a week or two, before Brady could decide whether he wanted to take it or fight for his $40,000, he was murdered with a 7-gauge shotgun and shot down brutally by a man from Fort Ord named Mr. Buffington, who never went to jail. All he had to do was to go to Vacaville and wait and pay the funeral expenses for Brady Avery's family and be released. And the excuse to release him was he had never killed a man before. And this was one of the most important civil rights cases because a black man had won against a small city like Seaside out here because he couldn't earn a living in this country. Brady was at my home 2 weeks before he was murdered, and I sat with the family. I think of the way Larry Flint was shot in the articles about him, stretched out with the tubes. We stayed at the hospital and moved Brady and tried to save from bed sores. He was brutally slain, and he laid there about a week or two, maybe a week, and then expired. And when the funeral expenses were paid, they wouldn't bury him unless $2,000 or $3,000 was put up right there in cash, and we all helped out. And then Buffington paid the funeral and is free on the streets today. Louise was active with the Long Presidio trial, the mutiny trial, where a man, Mr. Bunch, was murdered in the stockade there. He was deranged. He had lost his mind. And the other fellow saw him shot down by the guard, and they sat in the court and chanted for their attorney, Vincent Hallinan, and wouldn't go to work that day. And they were charged, I believe it was 20 or 21 men with mutiny. And 2 or 3 got stiff sentences like 20 or 30 years. And there were so many demonstrations in San Francisco, they moved the trials down the Monterey Peninsula. And then Natalie Gentile, whose son was one of the defendants, stayed at my home, and Louise went to the trial every day, and she was very active in those things. Now, Louise was exposing the Los Angeles Police Department, Evel Younger, and the reason I talk about Louise James at length, and I talked about another show when Lillian Castellano died, is that this woman was active in many, many things, and each one of them would be a reason to silence her. Her publication, The Nose, The Peace and Freedom, The Women's, The Panthers, The Prisoners, the Seeing, the Watson gang. Now, the reason I go into her background is that she was totally reliable with appointments. She was precise. She was organized. She would have no reason to make up anything that she saw because she never had hallucinations or anything like that. When the men were arrested at Watergate Hotel June 17, 1972, Louise told me that she also recognized James McCord from a time when she lived in New Mexico and was an artist, and she recognized the Watergate defendants, and she helped me with my article, Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped? We were working on it, and all of a sudden, Louise got what it was called a heart attack. And at the time, living at her home was a young woman who came out here from Brandeis University to Carmel, California. Her father is a psychiatrist in Pasadena, California. She moved into Louise's house to help, in quotes, with the women's movement or the Nose. And Louise has blamed this person, I won't name her on the air, as putting some substance in her water. Louise remembers and says something was put in my water because she only drank bottled water that she got at the store, and she was a health food freak and very healthy and clean and meticulous. But this person moved into her house, and then the house began to fall apart, and Louise had what they called a heart attack, violently sick. Now, the similarities to what Louise got in 1972 physically were identical to what my son had in 1967 while I was in New Orleans with Jim Garrison. The only difference was that two people were at the house and saw a woman, Carolyn Gilman, who lived on the peninsula, whose husband worked with Aristotle Onassis and the Central Intelligence Agency. Two people saw this person, Carolyn Gilman. I can name it because they could come on the show and tell you that she handed to my son, Marvin Goodwin, this acid. And that gave him a violent heart attack. He was writing songs for Bobby Darin and going to the University of California. He had what was supposed to be a heart attack. He was 19 years old. Louise had a heart attack, 19 years. She was older, around in her 30s. Marvin, maybe early 40s at that time. Yeah, I guess she was about 45. Marvin was 19. But they had the similar symptoms. Their memory was gone. They became rigid, catatonic, wasted away, almost starved to death, had similar symptoms. She became a hermit. He became a hermit. They were cut off from their friends. Two people, different in age, but the mother one working with the other one. And Marvin was sent down to a hospital in Los Angeles and has recurrent cases. He's in a trauma now. He's been on Dialogue Conspiracy with me. He has blacked out in the last 3 weeks since Los Angeles. When I saw him in it was in February, Larry Flint's office challenging Mark Lane and an agent of the FBI. Marvin has flipped out, but Louise flipped out chemically some way because all of her memory and political activity ended just as drastically as you turn a light off in the room and it's over. You turn the oven off and walk out of a kitchen. Louise's mind went. She was half starved. She was taken away. She now lives in Salinas. The only person she would see after her mental transition was a man who she accused of being an agent on this peninsula, a CIA agent. She accused him publicly and everywhere. That man came around all the time to see her, and that was the only person she trusted after she had the breakdown. And the old friends couldn't get around with her. There was this sudden overnight change. Louise is in Salinas. She's, as I say, has a conservator. She lives like you see these pictures of the Borgia Stick, that movie. She lives quietly, does some artwork and sewing. She does no political work at all. It reminds me, if you get the book Operation Mind Control, which we'll talk about, on the back of the book it says, for over 25 years the CIA has developed a technology of terror. Its purpose, in quotes, to devise operational techniques to disturb the memory. Its purpose is to devise techniques to discredit people through aberrant behavior. Its purpose is to alter sex patterns or to create an emotional dependence. Louise has her memory disturbed. She is discredited because of her behavior, and she has emotional dependence and has to be the ward of the state. My own son Marvin now, last 3 weeks, has gone through hell. He has had another relapse. He claimed that people were in his apartment leaving ledgers. He is going through a memory disturbance. He is discredited because of his behavior. He's created another emotional dependence. Louise James was a fantastic political person. So when the New West says, or the people in the court try to say that Louise James is not a credible witness, I will go to court in June and tell them exactly what I'm telling you here and accuse the Central Intelligence Agency because of the symptoms of her disease and the way she suffered and what happened to her. I will accuse them of having altered her mentally and neutralizing her, because there is every possibility and good possibility that she did see those people in that home and had to be neutralized and was neutralized. Well, we'll do more about the Holocaust next week and mind control. This is Mae Brussell. It's Dialogue Conspiracy. Take care and keep your eyes open and read the paper and see some of this that's going on.
You've been listening to Dialogue Conspiracy with Mae Brussell.